Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Prepare, Protect, Preserve, Readying Your Business for Disaster. I'm Janice Kaplan with the Marketing Department at James Moore & Company, and I'll be your host. With me today to present is Curtis McAllister, MCSE and Manager of Technology Solutions for James Moore.
Good afternoon.
Now, for those of you who haven't met Curtis, he provides consulting, planning, delivery, and implementation services for our clients' technology needs. This covers just about everything related to IT, including network configuration, security, software and hardware purchases, cloud-based computing, and more. Now, before we get started, we'll address a few items. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, but keep in mind that we'll address them at the end, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. If your question isn't answered, we'll be sure to follow up with you at a later date. Also, if you encounter technology issues during the presentation, please call the number on your screen and request webinar support. And one more thing, we'll be having a few polling questions throughout the presentation, so please take a moment to answer each of them. It'll give us a clearer understanding of your situation, and as a result, we'll be better able to help you out. All that said, let's get started. Curtis?
Thanks, Janice. So, like Janice said, I'm Curtis McAllister, the Manager of Technology Solutions for James Moore & Company, and today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about preparing your business for disasters. Now, to get started, we're going to probably redefine what most of us think of when we think of disasters. When we look at the definition of a disaster, what we see most common is a sudden event which causes great damage or cost or serious disruption. Now, that's pretty broad, but it certainly holds true in Florida, where James Moore is located at. The thing that really impacts us the most is natural disasters such as hurricanes. If we're out west, it'd be floods. And nobody would argue that a hurricane coming through your town is not a disaster. It certainly is. It can cause a lot of damage. It can cause a lot of service disruption for your business. But there are other disasters that we're going to talk about in just a little bit that are probably a little more common and things that most businesses, most people wouldn't really consider a disaster until they've had it happen or experienced it. To start off, let's just ask a quick question.
First question, how long were you without power during the 2017 hurricane season? We've got less than a day, 1 to 3 days, more than 3 days, or maybe you never lost power. Take a few seconds to answer. And we'll close the question now, and let's share the results. Okay, it looks like almost half of you were out for 1 to 3 days, and everybody else is kind of spread across pretty evenly.
Yep, which is somewhat to be expected in most situations. What we saw in 2017, we saw 17 named storms, 2 of them major hurricanes which hit landfall in the United States, which resulted in $202 billion in damages. Countless people without homes, countless businesses that were literally demolished. As we start looking at the 2018 hurricane season, it's going to be just as bad, maybe even a little bit worse. They're projecting 16 named storms, 18 hurricanes, and they are anticipating 4 landfalls in the U.S. Based on last year, we can expect a lot of businesses are going to be impacted. Some businesses still haven't recovered from the 2017 hurricanes. Some businesses that we know of here in Florida really haven't fully recovered from the 2016 hurricane season. Usually when a hurricane comes through, it does cause a lot of damage, a lot of disruption, and it just takes forever to get things fixed and back up to speed where they should be. But hurricanes aren't the most common problems that businesses face. More commonly, a business disaster that you would probably experience is the loss of a critical person. That person can be an executive director, a CEO, a special department head, maybe even your IT manager. But the loss of a critical person, if processes are not put in place, can have a very detrimental effect on your service delivery. The other fairly common problem or disaster that businesses will face, accidental release of information. That could be something such as accidentally sending an email that contains private information or confidential information to unintended recipients. Accidentally sending a financial statement, a list of social security numbers. If you're in the medical industry, accidentally releasing somebody's private health information to a third party. You didn't mean to, but it does happen. And when that happens, the business is faced with a number of legal concerns, which again, could be a disaster. Now, these things we're not really going to cover so much in this webinar, but I wanted to raise attention to them because they're fairly common, and we want you to be thinking about it. We want to get the juices flowing with this webinar. Now, what can be a disaster for your business, directly related to your technology, things like liquid spills. Certainly, somebody in this webinar knows somebody else who has dropped their cell phone in some water or has spilled something on their computer keyboard. Now, in most situations, that's not really a disaster, unless, of course, it's a key person that did it. Let's say, for example, your executive director or your CEO is out of state on a business trip and something happens to the laptop and they end up losing their data or losing access to their machine, access to their data. That can be catastrophic. People drop laptops all the time. They get broken, they become unserviceable, and something that happens in Florida quite often with the hurricanes and inclement weather comes power surges and lightning strikes. James Moore has handled a number of clients that has been hit by lightning. And we can put in surge suppressors, we can put in battery backups, but the reality is when that many volts comes through the system, it's going to damage something. It's going to jump across the surge suppressors, it's going to walk down the wires, and it's going to tear stuff up. Now, what's tough about a power surge such as this is it will only kill equipment right then, but will damage equipment so that it fails in 4 or 6 months down the road. So what we need to do is we need to put processes and systems in place to continuously protect your business information and your technology environment. Another threat that could be deemed a disaster, stolen computers. More and more computers are being stolen out of cars, out of airports than they ever have been. And with advanced cracking technology, when a laptop is stolen, it can be broken into fairly easily. If it's your laptop and you have software on it which has you storing your passwords inside of it, or you have shortcuts or links or other pieces programmed into the computer, saved in the computer, so that lets you directly into your infrastructure, well, that could be a good way to have your infrastructure compromised. In 2010, Intel did a study, 7.1% of all laptops were stolen before they reached their effective life. Effective life of a laptop is about 4 to 5 years. Some people stretch them out longer, but 4 to 5 years is what we look at. 7% of all laptops are stolen, of those laptops are stolen. In 2011, the Bureau of Crime Statistics reported that laptop thefts continue to rise, and that has been a growing trend every year, partially because there are more laptops in the marketplace. It's becoming more common to use laptops as your business resource. We have one particular client that part of their disaster recovery strategy was to issue all their employees laptops so that being in Florida, if a major hurricane came to town and they had to evacuate, they had their computers they could take with them. $48 billion has been lost due to data breaches, 28% of which were tracked back to stolen laptops. So it's a fairly big problem. And again, most laptops may not be a big deal, but if you have a laptop that has private information on it and it gets stolen, you have to report that. If you have client information on that laptop, you have to report that potential compromise of your client's personal information. So I mentioned security breaching. I mentioned compromising the data from a stolen laptop. Security breaches, again, they're on the rise. People are having their networks broken into by hackers, by malicious people that are seeking to cause harm. Most of the time, they just want some information. They want that personal information that your network is holding. They want to try and get some account numbers. They definitely want to try to get personal information of your employees, full name, address, social security number, things that they can then sell to the black market so that you can have your identity stolen. In 2016, it was reported that there's been a 40% increase in data breaches. Just last year, Equifax reported it was penetrated, and it had been penetrated for a while before either they realized it or they reported it. But 145 million people were affected. It's a big problem, and it has far-reaching repercussions for those affected. But data breach really isn't the most significant problem that we're facing. The fastest growing problem that we're seeing, the biggest threat, is ransomware. I'm sure everybody's heard the term ransomware. That's a virus software that gets put on your computer, that gets into your system, starts encrypting your data, and they hold your data hostage. They expect you to pay a fine to get access to your data. Last year, $42 billion were paid in ransom. That's double that of 2016. It's a profitable business for the people that's developing the software. And it's a tough problem for you as a business owner to combat because most antivirus software doesn't catch the ransomware threats. at least not the latest versions. Most firewalls are a little bit slow to catch on to them. And when they do affect a machine, they stay quiet while they do their damage in the background before they give you the notice that you need to pay them some money. Now, I will say, of all the ransomware attacks that our clients have seen, our clients have never paid a ransom. And our clients also have not lost any real data because of the processes and procedures that we've put in place for them that we're about to talk about now. So, how do we fix this? How do we prepare ourselves? The problem is disasters come in many shapes and sizes. We can't just build a plan or strategy for each and everything. So we have to look at the big picture. We have to look at what can we do which protects us from the most common threats. And where we start is by building a disaster recovery plan. A disaster recovery plan is a document built for your organization at multiple levels, both IT and administrative. It contains both logistical and technical information of what to do when a disaster happens. And the purpose of the plan is to give you guidelines and a direction to move into without having to give it a whole lot of thought. You can start responding immediately while you address the problem, whether that is a stolen laptop, whether it's a data breach, or whether it is a hurricane that's coming. It gives you the groundwork to prepare your business. So from a logistical sense, some of the things that you need to put in your disaster recovery plan: key employee contact information. Who are your C-level people? How do you get a hold of them? You want to list your managers. You probably want to list your IT people. Also, how do you notify these people? You're obviously going to have cell phones, email addresses. Are there alternate phone numbers for if the primaries don't work? Those need to be listed in there. Also, who's going to be doing the calling? Is it a call tree where high level calls the manager, then the manager starts calling other people? Is one person calling everybody? Those are things that you need to plan out and think about in advance, because when the disaster happens, you don't have time to think about it. You need to have that process already defined and laid out. And you need to train your staff on it so everybody knows what to expect. Other information: vendor contact, your electrician, your internet service provider, your plumber, your corporate insurance provider, maybe even the hardware vendors that if you need to buy computers, where are you going to get the computers from, as well as any account numbers or codes that you're going to need. Now, I certainly would not suggest putting confidential information in your disaster recovery plan. That needs to be kept separate, but contact numbers and account numbers are generally okay. When we move into the technical side of the house, you want to put things in there like your daily backup and recovery procedures, so that you know what data is being backed up, how often and by what system, and if you ever need to recover data, how do you recover that data? Are you using a third party to manage that backup solution? And if so, how do you engage them to recover that data? Also, system startup and shutdown procedures. Hurricanes coming, you certainly don't want to leave your servers running in most cases. You want to shut them down, get everything buttoned up. What's the procedures for doing so? And you want this documented in case your lead IT is not available, because sometimes that happens. You also want to put relocation and evacuation procedures. Who's going to evacuate and when? It would not be unreasonable when you know a hurricane's coming, if you have this type of warning, to have an advanced guard leave the area. That way, if there is an evacuation ordered, they've already made it out. They don't have to fight the traffic. They can take key information with them, a copy of your data backup, maybe a couple other key individuals, important documents, things such as that, to get them out of the area. Worst case scenario, the storm misses you and they spend some time and money going to another state for nothing. Best case scenario, the storm is catastrophic and you already have a jump start on getting back in business. After we get past the disaster, after that initial, we got to fix whatever the problem is to somewhat stabilize the organization. Now we need to start talking about how do we keep the organization running? How do we keep business flowing long term? Let's assume that there's, for some reason, you can't conduct business as normal for a period of time. And each business is different. That period of time could be hours, if let's say you're a medical facility, or it could be after a week or two. But at some point, you're going to have to get back to normal business. And if you can't move back into your office for whatever reason, you need to have a strategy for what to do. So here's the business continuity plan. Much like the disaster recovery plan, it's all about preparation. But in the business continuity plan, you're mapping out what to do in different scenarios. For example, if I'm a healthcare organization and I have to see patients, because if I'm not working, my patients suffer. Well, if I have a localized problem, let's say my power goes out because something happened to the power pole down the road, and the electric company thinks it's going to be 6 or 12 or 14 hours before it's fixed. I can't see patients for 14 hours. That's going to have a financial impact on my business. That's also going to have a personal impact on my clients. What do I need to do so I can make sure that my clients can be seen, that my patients can be taken care of? So I want to make provisions in my business continuity plan for that. Maybe that's a generator. Okay, I have a generator. Have I planned for gasoline? If it's a localized event, not a big deal. But let's say it's a wide area event, like what we saw after the 2017 storms, where power was out for days and gas was in short supply. Is your generator run off natural gas or propane? Or is it gasoline? Or is it diesel? You have to plan for that. How long can you run? If you have to have the service running all the time, what's a reasonable amount of fuel to keep? What happens if your internet service goes out and it's expected to be out for a while? Do you need an alternate service? Some businesses, it may not be a big deal. You may not be internet dependent. You may not even be technology dependent. Other businesses, if you have heavy requirements on technology, heavy requirements on internet, then you need to plan accordingly. And those plans need to be documented in your business continuity plan. And that needs to include a hot or a cold site. These are alternate locations to work from. A hot site is a site that's already running, it already has equipment in place, it already has your data in place, often synced automatically. It could be with a business partner, it could be with a data center, it could even be with another business location that you own out of state. But it's already prepped for you to walk into immediately without a whole lot of preparation work before you can put it to use. In contrast, a cold site, it's just a location. Maybe it's an agreement with a business partner that, hey, if something happens, you can set up some workspace in their building. Maybe it's a data center someplace else. But a cold site doesn't have anything in place for you already. It's just a location and an agreement. You still have to put equipment there, which means you may have to purchase equipment. You may have to build equipment, build out their architecture, get your data restored. That has to be planned out. How it gets funded has to be planned out and should be part of your business continuity plan. Important thing to remember about these plans, they have to be accessible. You have to keep them updated. They should be reviewed at least once a year, and they should be tested at least once a year as well. You need to educate the staff. Anybody that's going to be involved in executing any portion of these plans needs to review the plans and needs to be trained on what's expected of them. So let's ask another question.
Okay, here it is. Do you have a disaster recovery or business continuity plan? Yes, I have both. I have a disaster recovery plan, but not business continuity, or I don't have either type of plan. So let's go ahead and take a few seconds here. And I'm going to go ahead and close the question so that we can share our results.
Okay, it looks like most people are indicating that they have both plans on hand. That's fantastic. Definitely glad to hear that. Make sure we keep them updated, make sure we keep them tested. That's definitely off to a good start. So we've talked about plans, we talked about threats. Now let's talk about what's probably the best magic shield that we can use that will cover you or protect your business in most situations, whether it's a hurricane coming to town or whether it's a ransomware. And specifically, what's kept James Moore's clients from having to pay ransoms. Naturally, I'm talking about data backups. Data backups have been around since the beginning of computers, the beginning of the internet. They're what we use to make copies of your data in a way that we can recover from any type of catastrophe or failure. Now, most common data backups, we're going to talk about here in just a second, file folder backups, old school, traditional, very basic, often work when they're set up properly and they're managed appropriately. They're just kind of the meat and potatoes of it. Don't have any fancy bells or whistles. They just get the job done in many situations. But where they fall short is when it comes to applications like databases and email, which means your backup solution has got to be application aware, meaning it knows how to talk to that application's data. It knows how to best back it up. And in doing so, it gives it better protection, lets you provide more granular restoration. And some applications like databases even need an application-aware backup to work properly. Another backup type that's become very popular is the image-based backups. These essentially take a snapshot of the entire system as a whole. Now, these are really nice for a number of reasons. They do have their drawbacks though. It's generally slower to take an image-based backup. Technology is improving all the time and it's getting better, but relatively speaking, it's still generally slower. But they're the fastest to restore from an entire system failure. And when you do that restore, it's a complete system restore down to where the icons are placed on the desktop. That gives us a lot of flexibility when it comes to recovering. It makes it easier to recover to alternate hardware or even to a virtualization environment, either on-premise or even in the cloud. Now, there's always give and take. Since they're the biggest backup, They take longer to perform. They also tend to cost more than your basic file and folder backup. So each business kind of has to weigh out what's important to them. Also, when we're talking about backups, we need to look at where we're going to store the backups. Traditionally, backups have been locally stored. Local storage of backups is fantastic because they're super fast to back them up, super fast to restore them, because you're literally moving at the speed of your network, which this day and age is a gigabit, super fast. Local backups tend to be fairly inexpensive. Hard drive space, storage space is pretty small, pretty economical now. I am talking about disk-based backups. Tape backups, they're still out there in some situations, but they're definitely no longer the norm or the most common. The biggest problem with local backups is they're vulnerable. If something happens to your building, something happens in your server room, your local backups are probably compromised as well. Which takes us to cloud backups. Cloud backups are nice. That's moving data away from your site. Now, we could be talking about a private cloud in a data center that you own, you manage, or we could be talking about a cloud such as Microsoft Azure or Amazon. Cloud backups, they're fairly slow to back up and definitely slow to restore. Because they're dependent on your internet capacity and how slow they are, you may not be able to move all of your data to the cloud. You may only be able to move portions of it. Kind of have to look at that based on your requirements. But they protect you from localized events. If your data is in the cloud and your building gets blown away by the next hurricane, that data that's in cloud is still safe. Cloud data is often replicated across multiple data centers. Whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Amazon, they get protected in their own ways. So you kind of have to decide what strategy is right for me. What's going to best protect my business? I'll tell you, in most situations, what we recommend to our clients is you don't pick. Why pick? Go hybrid. Use the best of all the solutions in a combined package so that you get the best of all the worlds and you mitigate the weaknesses of all of them. That's a strategy that we most often take. But you have to make that decision for your own business. And before you make that decision, you have to look at two metrics. You need to look at what's called RPO, or Recovery Point Objective. That's how much business information you're comfortable losing. I'm taking backups every 12 hours. Okay, that means your vulnerability is 12 hours of data being lost. If you're in a business where you can't lose any data, you need to build that into your strategy right from the beginning. The other side of that coin is RTO, or Recovery Time Objective. How long can you be down before you're impacted? And we're talking about large system failures, main system restores. If you're a business that cannot be without their systems for more than a few minutes, you need to take that into account. An image-based backup is something you're going to want to look at. Now, you may be in a position where you're thinking, hey, you know what? I can't lose any data and I can't lose any time. That's fine. We can help you do that. Your IT guys can definitely help you do that. Just understand that's going to cost you more money and it's going to be more resource intensive. So you have to put it in perspective. You have to measure your business risk and make the determination from there. As you're making that determination, you need to look at what your compliance requirements are, what your process requirements are. If you have an external source that you report to that says, hey, I have to have access to this data on a moment's notice, okay, RTO becomes much more important. We, for example, have a client that is in such a case that they report to shareholders and they have to be able to provide financial reports within 24 hours of the request. If they don't, they can be levied strong penalties and fines. Therefore, the RTO is super important to them. Now, along with that, we're talking about financial information. The RPO on that financial important is also in high demand. So as you can imagine, the backup solution that's implemented for that particular client is a fairly robust one. When you're looking at your backup requirements, you need to think about, okay, what do I need to back up and at what levels? Because it's not uncommon to have different RTO and RPO for different systems. That's totally acceptable. We do that ourselves here at James Moore. I have some systems that don't need to be backed up as frequently because they're mostly static. The information doesn't change that often in them, and what changes is very minor. So 99% of the data that's on the system today is the exact same data that was on the system 3 weeks ago. I have other systems, on the other hand, that the data moves so fast and the information on it is so dynamic and so necessary that I have to back it up every 15 minutes. Because more than 15 minutes of data loss is significantly detrimental to my business process. So you have to just weigh that out as you go. So when you're looking at backups, servers, that's the obvious one. Back up your servers. Now, you don't always need to back up all of your servers. For example, we have a client that has a terminal server farm of 9 terminal servers. These 9 servers are exactly alike. They're load balanced, the applications are the same, they don't have any data on them. So as you can imagine, we don't back up all 9 of these servers. We're only backing up a couple of them. Now, they're a database server, on the other hand, you can bet that gets backed up often, multiple times a day. Same thing with their email server. These systems, you have to look at your business process and see what makes sense for you. I have one client, they're a trucking company client, that they get most of their orders in via email. So email availability is really important to them. But once that email comes in and they process it, they don't need that email anymore. So what happens after the fact doesn't matter. They have to have that high uptime, that high recovery. They don't have to have high data retention on their email. That's the type of things that you need to look at when you're planning your backup strategy. Also, there may be critical workstations that you need to protect. Workstations that may run specific pieces of machinery. A number of health organizations that have equipment that run off of a workstation. Those are systems that probably need to be protected. Most workstations, on the other hand, do not, and you need to weigh that in. There are some other backup strategies that we really want to talk about. We just kind of want to address. These other backup strategies, in most situations, would not be recommended strategies for the business or the enterprise, simply because they don't either provide the reporting or the accountability that an enterprise should have. They're not as robust enough to provide detailed backups as quickly as they should have. For example, manually doing backups to removable media. If you're an organization of more than, let's say, 6 people, and you are manually doing backups of your data, you're putting your business at risk, and you're taking a lot of time to put them at risk. You should be using a more robust solution that can run automatically, provide detailed reports of what was backed up and what failed to back up, that your IT people can then run tests against. Now, in some situations, a manual backup to removable media is okay in a one-off scenario. For example, I mentioned earlier your evacuation team. Making a manual copy of your backup data to removable media for them to take off site, totally okay. Your main backup is still taking place, but they're just taking a copy of it with them. That's all right. Another solution that we see often, but we tend to want to discourage in the enterprise, is web-only backups. And these are different than the cloud-based backups that I mentioned earlier, because these backups, they're endpoint based. They kind of run in the background. They're easy to set up, but they're also not very robust. They work more as a basic file and folder backup. They just store in the cloud. And I'm talking about the Crash Plans, the Carbonites, the Moseys. They have their place. They're great if you want to protect your family pictures on your home computer. They're not as great if you're trying to protect your corporate data. Now, saying that, let's recognize all these solutions do have business components to them. They have the residential or the consumer, and they have the enterprise class plans. So they do have options out there. And if you feel after research and investigating your business need that they fit your need, then by all means use them. There are some scenarios that we have a Crash Plan, for example, running at some clients. It's not the preferred solution, but in situations it works. I went over a lot of ground, covered a lot of material. I want to kind of boil it down to 5 laws of disaster preparation. If you follow these 5 laws, you will be much better prepared for the next disaster, whether it's a ransomware attack or whether it's a hurricane or whether it's a building fire. It doesn't matter. These will help protect you. First, make your business continuity and your disaster recovery plans. Keep them up to date. Test them on a regular basis. And something we see often enough is the plan is made, but it's in one person's head. I was just talking to somebody the other day that said, oh yeah, I know exactly what I do when a disaster happens. It's all in my head. Well, that's great, but you need to document it. If it's not on paper, it's no good to you. Because what happens if something happens to that one person? It doesn't have to be something bad. They could be on vacation in Hawaii and can't get back. No cell service, whatever. So make sure the plans are documented and keep them documented with yearly reviews. I've said it already, educate your staff. A well-documented plan that nobody knows about is no good to you. Make sure the staff that's going to be involved know about it. Make sure the other staff know where to find it if they need it. Where you should put it. Definitely have a digital copy on your network, that's fine, but make sure you have a digital copy off your network as well. Have a hard copy stored somewhere. Safety deposit box is a great place to store it. A hard copy and a digital copy should be sent with your evacuation team. Don't keep it hidden. Test your plans. Go through the processes, go through the scenarios on a regular basis. Data backups, for example, should be tested no less than once a month. You should be looking at the logs daily and make sure that the logs say everything's good. And if the logs say everything's good, then test once a month. If the logs are telling you that you have problems, test more often. Nothing's worse than finding that you need your backup data just to discover that it's not usable for whatever reason. Nothing's harder than trying to recover from a disaster under stress when the plans that you've written don't work. I know I've emphasized it enough because it's so important review it yearly. Make sure it's updated. You need to update it anytime anything significant changes. Key members change, key resources change. Maybe you change your internet service provider. Maybe your primary contact for your electric company or your plumber changes. Maybe the manager got promoted and is no longer in the same role, and somebody else needs to be the person that makes the phone calls. That needs to be reviewed and updated. Cannot stress it enough. So now let me open the floor to questions.
Okay, let's take a look. And thank you, Curtis. That's great information on preparing for the unexpected. So we're going to take a look at our questions that have come in here. How often should I update my disaster recovery plans?
You should update your disaster recovery plan at least once a year, or anytime a significant change in solution or personnel take place.
Okay, next question. How should I store our plan? I think you touched base a little on that one.
Yep, I mentioned that. We like to keep a hard copy off-site as well as digital copies, both local and off-site. I believe we store ours in a safety deposit box, and our IT manager has a copy as well.
Regarding ransomware, if we get hit with ransomware, should I pay the ransom?
That really depends on what protections you have in place. Like I said earlier, none of our clients have ever paid the ransom, but we've always had a very strong and robust backup solution in place. However, we've been called in to other businesses that were not our clients at the time that did not have a backup solution in place, and they in fact had to pay the ransom. So it really depends on what preparations you've made.
Okay, and on a related note, will we get our data back if we pay?
Usually you do, because it's a business for the people that's writing and publishing the ransomware. If they didn't give you your data back, then there wouldn't be a business because the word would get out. Now, saying that, there's often a time limit with ransomware. And the longer it takes you to pay, the more you're going to have to pay. And at some point, very often 72 or 96 hours, they will make it where you cannot get your data back, no matter how much you pay. So if you get hit with ransomware, you need to determine pretty quickly, do you have the resources to recover without paying? And if you don't, then the sooner you pay, the better. And most of the time you have to pay with Bitcoin, which is somewhat of a process to get in the first place. The interesting thing is, again, this is a business for them. If you're trying to get Bitcoin, there's often a way you can contact them directly, and they can give you instructions on how to get Bitcoin so you can pay them. It's crazy.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Curtis. Now, if anyone else thinks of a question after we're done here, please feel free to contact us. As you all know, our firm maintains a dedicated technology consulting services team, and these professionals have a wide range of certifications and experience. And some of the services we provide are listed on your screen, or will be momentarily. You'll see that a couple of them are highlighted, since they're especially relevant to what we've covered today. So if you want to take a moment and look at those, and if you'd like to know more about these services, or if you're still unsure about how to safeguard your company's network and data from disaster, or you need help implementing these steps, we highly encourage you to reach out to Curtis. His contact information is up there on your screen. I know that he and his team would be more than happy to help. Now, thank you once again for attending our webinar, and we hope you have a great day.